I was talking to people who were creating digital twins from oil platforms, and he told me, you know what? It sounds a lot like DevOps. We have the people sitting in the room looking at the model and then saying, you need to drill here. And then there's the people on the oil platform who says, you can't drill here.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 200. From Digital Twins to Management, a conversation with Patrick Debois. Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darren and Victor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darren reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Victor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darren Pope and Victor Farson. Victor, we are now at 200 episodes.
Should we continue? Is this where we stop? Thank you all for listening.
Well, considering we're actually recording this after I've already edited some things after 200, no, we're still going. That's the beauty of doing podcasts, is you can do things out of order. And the clap that you hear in the back, much like any Divide by 50 episode, we have the most wonderful Patrick Debois on with us again. Patrick, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. It's always a surprise when you ping me that time has flown again.
It's like almost once a year, wow. Right? What we need to do is we need to come up with get rid of the Gregorian calendar, get rid of all the other calendars, and we just need a Patrick calendar. That's every 50 weeks.
200 in binary.
Right.
How long would that look like? Like how many ones and zeros after each other?
I can't do that kind of math in my head. I don't even know that I can do that kind of math anymore. Look, I was having to actually calculate angles within a triangle the other day. Do you know how many decades it's been since I tried to do trigonometry or geometry? I felt like such a doofus. I used to be able to do calculus when I was in high school. Now I can't even figure out an angle in a triangle. That's not why we're here. We're here to talk about Patrick.
Not really.
Patrick, again, if you don't know who he is, has been deemed the godfather of DevOps by many. But Patrick has, can we say, moved on from that?
But yeah, DevOps is dead.
Is that a safe way to say it?
Why you keep interviewing me? I don't know. Like, it's done. It's like DOD.
The reason why we keep bringing you back is you keep getting into things that we're trying to track and say, hey, we were the first ones to tell you about this. Well, actually, Patrick was the first one to tell you about it via Twitter. Then we were the ones that told you about it and had to talk about it. So what does that look like now in 2023? What are you caught up in the AI mess? Are you caught up in other weird things? I know digital twins were a thing last year for you. I had an idea. Victor and I actually talked about this once. Could we actually have physical twins? Take the stuff that's in digital and bring it in physical?
Clone people.
No. Well, okay, sure. Why not?
I mean, if you mean objects, then that's any factory, right? That produces thousands of something.
True that. Although there is an interesting angle in digital twins and humans. So, like beginning last year, like you said, I did some research digging into digital twins. It seems like the obvious choice somewhere to model what we've been doing in infrastructure, in IT. And the reason why I came to that was about if you scan things in security, you have all these alerts. Hey, there's a vulnerability here and there and there. And it turns out it's all about triaging, like, is it really a vulnerability? And then you see this popping up in your Kubernetes, you see this in your container file, you see this kind of in your code scanning. And I figured if you have a better model of understanding how your actual things works, you can do some reasoning on this. So that's kind of what made me look at digital twins. So a few companies since then have taken off. Now, recently, also Adam Jacob is kind of basing a lot of his thinking in his new company, which I totally forgot the name about, but you know who he is. Think about that. There's some security companies, but the point that I want to make is, imagine you have this perfect model. You're a SaaS company, you have this model of a customer. You can do reasonings on security, on costs, a little bit like Terraform plan, right? You kind of know what would be happening. But this is actually only one part of the equation. Imagine then you have a model how the organization actually works. And then becomes interesting, because then that's about creating a model of the humans dealing with that technology. Who's really doing the alerting? Who's really doing the fixes? Should we route that issue directly to that person? I found actually that there's a category in the Gartner life cycle, whatever you name it, that is about creating that part of digital twin of the organization. And then the other interesting example I found was Facebook is trying to do testing, but they're at a scale they can't really have a Facebook spin up on the laptop of the developer kind of. And one of the things they did is they use the term cyber whatever thing in the way that they run their tests on production. Blasphemy, right? And they just have bots that have rules. Like, this bot should never have a friend. Go wild on Facebook. Whatever you do, you never get a friend. And this is an alternative way of modeling whatever user behavior similar to that. So anyway, that was maybe my short intermezzo on digital twins, because you brought it up. I think it's a fascinating thing. I was talking to people who were creating digital twins from oil platforms, and he told me, you know what, it sounds a lot like DevOps. We have the people sitting in the room looking at the model and then saying, you need to drill here. And then there's the people on the oil platform who says, you can't drill here. You must be wrong. You have a different view of reality. And so his job was actually trying to align those people, like what was considered in the testing and the development and the real production thing. So it's everywhere, whether we like it or not. Collaboration is everywhere. They might not be running Kubernetes or containers. I don't know. That was besides the point there. But do you believe we'll ever get to that stage of modeling things more? It used to be a big thing when I was young. Like, model the world, UML, make a model. And sometimes I feel it's like making a comeback. You start creating documentation again, writing things up. Anyway, I don't know. What do you think?
I guess it depends how you define digital twins or something, right? But the term is relatively new, right? But people have been trying to represent things in digital way and increasing the amount or percentage that is represented for a long time, right? I see it kind of almost as something that continues, but now has a name in a way, right? Much of services in a cloud are in a way digital twins of what is happening behind the scenes, right?
No. But it is a term that's, if DevOps made an impact somewhere in the IT world or the SaaS world, digital twin as a concept, the last couple of years has made an impact on the industrial world, where physical world and change is costly, and they're trying to put things in models and do the reasoning. And I feel sometimes that we've solved the simple problems. Well, maybe not solved, theoretically solved, and practically not everybody has the solution in their head. But the trivial things about, we can do A and B has been solved, but we need to kind of move on to the more difficult problems.
Yeah. I mean, I had a very nice example, or I was discussing with people from a company, which I'm not going to name. They're into shipping business. Mm-hmm. And they're trying now on small scale and then increasing to create digital twins of their ships. And we're talking about large fleet of ships, right? Starting from simple like, hey, there is a ship, where is it, to, hey, where is anything, kind of what's happening on the ship, including all the containers, where they are, machinery, whether it's working, where it's located, kind of gradually going towards more and more of real-time mapping in a way of everything that is going on, and then having, similar to what you explained, right? A couple of people in a war room observing everything happening in their fleet, which to me sounded, I'm not sure whether that falls into digital twin part, but sounded very fascinating.
And I learned that, well, if you would consider most of the people think about their CI pipeline, putting things in production. So it's like what is it again? Like shift left? No, it's like shift right to production. And then quite often people, they put the monitoring on, but only fewer will actually get production similar data and set up back into production. So it's like representative cases, people like almost, we set out to build the clone of production, but sometimes we can't. There is a distinction apparently between, if you only have the link between one way, it's called a digital shadow. So you're kind of just having only one way, but a digital twin is actually, it gets updated in the model as it is in the real life. So that both can kind of have simultaneous impacts as well. So anyway, it's a small distinction, but I feel the bidirectional thing, the feedback loop is an interesting one there as well.
So I mean, the question is whether you're just replicating something or whether modifying your replica of something influences the original in a way.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, and how much they stay in sync and how much drift there is, because you don't know what the real world is. Again, sounded very familiar with things we're trying to accomplish with the drift. Yeah.
Well, that's Terraform Plan, Terraform Apply, right?
Yeah, in a sense, yeah.
It's in a way Terraform Plan, or no, I think it's closer to Terraform Show, or I think Output, right? Where you can actually get the current state of something that you already applied before, right? And then execute it all the time. Terraform output continuously, right?
Okay, enough about digital twins, I think. I think we've, because you've moved on from that, right?
Yeah, what was next? Oh, the metaverse was next for me.
Oh, dear.
So how long do you stay on big subjects, Karo? How long was digital twin for you? Weeks, months,
A couple
years?
of months. A couple of months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, I want to stay there for just a second. Forgetting about the AI stuff for a moment. With all the large language models and the amount of compute that it takes to actually get those in now, do you see, let's go ahead and break out the crystal ball on this, as the GPUs become available now since they're no longer crypto mining, could this actually help in building out these large organization models? Hey, I coined it right there, trademarked right then. Is that what we're doing? Because when you brought it up, it's like, okay, what about this developer? How do we model a person? Obviously, we're going to have to have a lot of compute to understand the attributes of a person. Is there something there? And then we'll get on back to the metaverse.
But it's not that much about compute. I mean, of course, but it's about sensors, right? Can we actually replicate? Because the example from Facebook, right? That's not really a replica of a real person. That's a representation of it, right? But maybe with Apple Watches, we're getting closer to reporting everything that is happening, and then theoretically, then with that compute, you can create a digital twin or part of it, right? Am I offbeat now?
Well, yeah, if it's continuous, but then if, say, your doctor says all of a sudden you should do movements, then if he changes the model, you start doing movements. We're not there yet. Well, you can get a notification and say, like, it's time to move. So, yeah, anyway.
So what you're saying is we're still decades away from actually being able to large organization model things.
On that perspective, I think yes. But maybe I misunderstood your question about.
No, that's fine. But then that ties us back to metaverse. We're talking about digital twins. Why the heck did you bother to go down that rabbit hole?
So it's actually not that big a step. If you look at digital twins, they often use game engines to start representing the complexity of the visual complexity of the digital twin. So that kind of was for me a trigger to look into that. So how do you, like, from that visualization, I moved on, like, how do people do visualizations with complex environments? There's a typical example of, here's your Kubernetes cluster, and you see this like blown up thing in VR or anything, and it's like eye candy, but it's not very useful. I just started looking into different ways. Like, if the model is getting more complex, we need a better way of zooming in, zooming out. So that's kind of my segue into the metaverse. That's not really completely the metaverse, but it got me into that just by the VR and then looking at the models and the visualizations. I did then a lot of research on complex visualizations and how to drill down to things. Rules like you cannot have more than 7 concepts at the same time visualized, and you need to drill down or like collapse nodes. But that's more of a graph thing that you can have in VR as well. If there's too much overload of sensors, then that's a problem. But then I moved on to things like, okay, what is really blocking us on a technology-wise thing? Like, is it the bandwidth? Is it the headset? Like, what's kind of getting really annoying? And then I learned, and it's not that new, but because the bandwidth or the latency has a problem between in game engines and in VR, we have that problem that we want to predict the next move and visualize the next move. And that made it interesting for me. It's like, okay, can we get better at predicting and still keep running things and then like later correct the course? So how would that apply in production where we try something, but we get more versatile? Like we kind of go one way and then we roll back. Is that like a feature flag, but more automated way of thinking about this stuff? Anyway, maybe I'm getting too more abstract on my reasonings on the metaverse. And then it was also about sharing the knowledge. I found that people have been trying to visualize codependencies very similar in that space and make sure you understand what's happening, impact analysis. But truth be told, I on a visualization, I don't believe in it yet. The goggles are not there yet to keep it on. Maybe on your screen, but then navigation is a problem. And I found that actually, let's say you have, I don't know if you heard about the C4 model of like the documentation and kind of the modeling thing. They think about this in layers, like you zoom in and zoom out to different layers. But if you would do that with a dependency build, I found it really hard to draw a line and say, like, this is one block of a build that belongs together, and then we can condense this into one view, like without any specificity, just almost like summarize a build step. Well, you can have it by the title, but if you want to do this automatically, then it becomes like a little bit blurry. Then I looked about how people would not visualize things, but do things in audio. It's a different sensor. I don't know if you remember the Monty Python thing, like the machine that goes ping, right? We've all been there somewhere. And then there were people trying to work this out while you were coding, your logs were streaming. It almost created like a radio system, ambient radio system, where you have your normal audio, but it would adapt this, and you have the subtle changes because something is wrong in production anywhere. people trying to apply this to security. When you type your password, it will kind of like give an audio cue, whether it was like more secure, yes or no. Anyway, like it's like weird stuff. I apologize for that, but if I go wild on research, I go wild. I don't care about whether it's useful for anybody else.
That's almost a point of research. You cannot know whether it's useful or no when you start it, right?
Correct. And there's weird stuff. You talked about the Apple Watches and your movement, right? But more and more, they be able to pick up your movement. I forgot the name what it is, but quite easily. So you don't have to wear a haptic suit anymore. It's just like you moving quite easily. And the same thing is with your eye tracking, which is completely changing. So there's a lot of things moving, but it still felt very clunky and an overhyped thing. But I just loved watching the technology under the hood. And that's what got me excited. Then another angle was about movie studios trying to use VR and virtual TV production to kind of create impossible shots. I found that also interesting. I was on a conference where all these big Hollywood studios were discovering what it meant to run a studio into the cloud. But I'm not talking about this recording. I'm talking about like massive files and how do you deal with that? And it turns out like all the bigger studios, they have their proprietary system. They're all dabbling their feet in cloud native and what it would mean to run a studio in the cloud. They don't dare to make the jump because they feel the cloud was not adapted for them. And then again, I found like, oh, there's something interesting here. They're doing things at a different scale than we're used to on files, on rendering speed, on whatever. But on the other hand, they were using Windows file shares to order their files. So it's kind of like, yeah, new, excited, and then kind of boring stuff because everybody took like the middle layer that actually worked.
Well, isn't everything boring in the
if
end?
It works.
It actually works.
Yeah.
I mean, think about how many times you go back to the command line and do SSH. Think about everything that's happening just within the SSH command itself, or curl, right? And you just don't think anything about it.
Yeah, isn't that what they call the abstraction? But the related thing is the irony of automation. I don't know if that's been mentioned before, but like the more you automate, the less you actually understand under the hood. It's like your car. It's like fully automated. But the problem then is if you don't practice and understand what's underneath, if it fails, you're like hands in the air. I don't know. So I usually give that example of the CI build pipeline. After 3 years, this has been completely automated and then it fails. And then nobody's been dealing with this for 3 years. And everyone was like, what do we do now? What do we do now? So you kind of have to keep doing the manual training just to keep up when things fail and be prepared for that. Not everybody, of course, but
that's what most military people would do, right? They're preparing. They want the primary way to go the right way, but if it doesn't go the right way, they've rehearsed what to do in case of that failure.
Correct. Yeah. And speaking, this is the paradox, right? Podcast, so we can speak about paradoxes. So there was this kind of automation thing. But then I realized this same paradox is on security. So imagine you're not secure. You start caring a lot about security. And all of a sudden you get like less and less issues. You're like, oh, it's okay. It's like, I'm not going to watch this. But there's this paradox about like, then all of a sudden you become less secure again. And same paradox happening on the business. Startup. Oh, I care for all customers, right? Because you just figure out like who you should target as a customer. But once you found out you're targeting the niche and you say like, goodbye, all the rest, you're not paying. I'm going to care about those that pay. And by doing that, you lose your audience. So paradoxes everywhere, like going against you all the time. So Maybe I should ask you the question. What's your favorite paradox? And by the way, why did you call it the paradox? DevOps paradox, actually.
I can answer that one because when you... So actually the real background is that I don't remember who. Anyways, one of the publishers asked me, hey, would you like to write a book that would be interviews with people about DevOps, right? And I did interviews with a number of people. And it turned up that every single one gave me a different explanation what it is. Because all interviews started, where interviews went in random directions, but they all started with a single question, nothing else prepared. What is DevOps, right? And just first few paragraphs of explanation what it is turned out to be completely, or at least partly different for every single person, right? Hence the name of the book, DevOps Paradox, and now the podcast. Because maybe that I was in special crowd or something like that, but I still, whenever I speak with somebody, hey, what is it? Kind of like, what are we talking? Because, people say, I'm doing DevOps. And I kind of, okay, so what does that mean? Kind of like, what are you doing? Not that I'm judging or anything like that. It's great, but just by telling me you're doing DevOps, I still don't know what you're doing, right? If you say, I'm doing CI/CD pipelines, okay, I know what that is, right? In most cases. But DevOps, what is it? I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, quite the opposite. But people take very different interpretation of what that is. Especially when it comes to practical parts.
So basically, we were just too lazy to come up with a different name.
Exactly.
So we just took the name from the book. And the domain was available.
Yeah.
So that's what we did.
Yeah.
So that's actually a great question because I don't know if we've ever told that full story or not, at least not on the podcast. So thank you for asking that. I would never have thought to explain why it's named what it is. Basically, we stole it from something that Victor did.
That's good.
So now we're in 2023. What are you doing now, Patrick?
Yeah.
Is it just you're raising chickens and growing, getting your own eggs?
Now that Facebook fired most of the people working in metaverse, you must be something else.
Well, I had a brief period about AI, but it's boring. So everybody knows AI right now. So it's not very important.
Okay, wait, stop. You said brief period. Okay, so at least give the briefness of it.
My angle was about, people were talking about at that time DALL-E and GPT, but I was trying to see the implications more on a broader scale. But that was before it became known. So now, that's why I say everybody knows right now. But before it was kind of somewhere niche and people were looking at models and it was like exciting, but nobody was listening basically. But I also, you see text to image, but then there's text to video, and then there's text to masking, like cutting things out in Photoshop. And there's so many text to audio, and then there's audio to video, and there's so much more in that people know than just ChatGPT and DALL-E. I made a video about it, but trying to expand this, like whether you create an icon, whether you create your design, whether you create your storyboard, there's so many things. There's now apps that create apps. So I just say like, please create me an app that takes GitHub URLs and scans them. And lo and behold, it just created an app. Please paste here. It even came up with the name. The whole field is expanding. But again, I think there's already so much noise on this that it's not worth the mentioning. I can mention my YouTube channel. People look the video there. I don't usually plug that, but I think it was a very good summary video for people who want to see this broader. And I also did a talk in DevOps Days Tel Aviv, how this would apply to DevOps in general, this usage. Whether it's in your testing, whether it's in your contract you need to write, whether it's in your service levels, whether it's in like so many different areas that I try to highlight where we could use this technology.
Do you think it's sort of at the point, still way front end hype cycle? Because the things that I see, I mean, some people are doing interesting things, but we're probably not hearing about the interesting things yet. We're just seeing all the flashbang type stuff at this point. Am I off on that, or is that? I'm seeing the how do we say this? The gold rush.
There's definitely a gold rush of things that it will fade out. The people put too much confidence in certain things that it will be perfect. So that's, I find the tricky part. If you find a good use case where perfectness is not that important, then you have a good chance of using the technology. But the rate at which it's going and the fact that it's so accessible to many right now, like what we see is just the tip of the iceberg from what's being prepared. And when I talked about text to video or other stuff, you see it now coming into the mainstream, but a lot of it was still just research and papers and not exact. And I'm going to give the example, of NVIDIA making technology that when you have a video call, it changes your eyes in real time, that it looks like you're looking into the camera, right? If you try this, you feel like Roger Rabbit because your eyes go like pop. Great idea, but it's not that useful because it's not that good yet. But if you would use lip sync technology that does a live translation of whatever you're talking about and changes your face and your lips, which can be okay enough for you to be comfortable as if you were listening to a person in real life, then that's good enough. So that's kind of where I see people sometimes have too high of expectations that eventually technology will solve everything, and then we'll always end up with things we can't predict. And you see that now, whatever you throw at ChatGPT, if it's good, people rave. If it's not, people are like, huh? And then try to imagine have it write automatically code. We will not do that. Assist us to write code? Yes. So again, finding that right balance of using it.
That happens, I think, with almost everything, right? People jump into the hype cycle and then very often forget how amazing that is for what it is.
Correct, yeah.
And project what the future should look like, but now, right? To me, when I saw for the first time ChatGPT, it was, oh man, this is so absolutely amazing. It's almost useless for any serious usage today, but just the fact that it exists is amazing, right? Yeah. But then most of the comments I see myself are in a similar line like yours, right? Oh, it made a mistake. It was born yesterday, man. Wait.
What I find interesting is, and I know you have to be very interested in open source and having people build software, and you could build pretty much everything with a few dollars and a cloud provider and your code. But you can't get that data. And that's kind of in a way worrying me that there was FOSDEM recently. There wasn't even an AI room because it's all proprietary in many ways. We're trying to get there, but the investments these companies are making, we can't match that right now. Maybe we will eventually in the community if we gather this, but this is going to be one of the challenges, how we keep control of the governance of those models and understanding the models, what goes in there, what doesn't.
Oh, yeah. I mean, code is going back to ChatGPT, right? OpenAI is open source. 3 of us could actually try to create ChatGPT killer tomorrow. The only thing missing is to have Google's data and...
By the way, OpenAI is not open source. They're even misleading with the name. It's not. So it's very misleading.
Really? I thought it's open source.
No. So for example, DALL-E came also from there. It's not open source. And then luckily we had Stable Diffusion, which is kind of the counterpart within open source being developed. But then again, it already created a fork. So we're back to like the proprietary OSs versus the open source discussion there as well. Anyway.
I did not know that. Okay.
They say it's open.
Yeah,
but
so it's
what does it mean?
inaccessible.
Yeah.
Again, even if it would be open source, right? Let's fantasize for a second. Still, what can you as a person do with it? Given that you need what is really difficult is getting the data and getting the compute power to do something with that data.
So it's almost like we need donations for clusters, like we used to have our build clusters in the open source communities to run these models and to be sponsored and to be governed. But then again, yeah, getting the data. I haven't seen it too much, but you never know. It's like the proprietary street maps versus eventually the crowdsourced data. So maybe there's hope. Who knows?
So is there anything else that's on your 2023 radar?
Actually, so after the AI, I completely switched gears because everybody was talking and it was like a lot of noise. I made a funny career move. I swore that I would always stay an individual contributor, and I moved to management.
Oh dear. No.
So,
You still are?
No.
I still am.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Why? Oh, why? Don't.
It's,
no.
No, but there is nothing wrong with management. It's just a question whether it fits a personality.
well, I don't know if it fits me. My reasoning was the role I'm working on is I was giving advice, and advice is very free. And it's not that I expect anybody to listen to me per se, but you feel like sometimes you're shouting in the void. And the difference now is that I might say the same things, but be able to bend more where we can go. And that's kind of the difference in why I accepted this. But I'm learning now, but I was already very conscious about dealing with costs, vendors, governance, and I find it quite interesting to apply similar principles on the technical level, but more on the organizational level. So again, I've always been interested in both, and now I get to work on both. And again, I'm not the manager like pure blood, but it helps to have an empathy and an understanding on what you're facing, and then kind of work around those problems.
And a kind of responsibility behind the recommendations that normally you give for free, right?
Yeah, you're on the line, right? You're committed. Like, what was that thing again with Agile? The pig is committed, but no, yeah, and involved. There was a difference. Anyway, long time.
I try to stay away from that, and I try to stay away from all those things. There's bad. So I'm sad that you've gone to the dark side of management. But at least we have somebody good going to that side. Maybe you can make some change.
I don't know if anybody agrees with that, but I find it interesting.
What has been the biggest change or pain for you making that change? It's
a different feedback loop speed. So when you're technical, you're like, I'm gonna build this, it works, it doesn't, I do a trial. But if you said, let's say, change a procedure, like one of the things we're working on is streamlining more about using ADRs in a company, documentation, stuff like that. It takes time to see whether that was a successful operation and that the impact is useful. It just is a matter of a couple of months before you actually know. And that's a completely different cycle from a technology. So that's kind of, is it a pain?
But also different scale, right? Because I'm guessing when you do something alone, you do on a much smaller scale. So that's part of the reasons why you see the results much quicker, right?
Correct, yeah. Words matter is also something I I learned it's very easy to be misinterpreted. Like one of the examples is, and that was not even me, but it could definitely happen to me. Somebody said, "We're going fully native," and then the whole mobile group says like, "Oh, right, we're gonna stop doing web views." No. It's like was kind of marketing speak. We're gonna go fully native, but it's just an example of like one of the things before somebody said we're gonna go fully serverless, right? And some people say, well, it's a good direction and we'll take it. For other, it means I'm going to rewrite everything we have in serverless, whether it fits or not. And so that's kind of nuances. I find myself writing way more, documenting myself when I say things, just to make sure I kind of give a broader perspective than maybe I was doing before.
Wow, you're doing more manual labor.
Well,
you can't automate that one away, can you?
Maybe I have ChatGPT coming up with a strategy or something, but
maybe. We're just saying it. Hypothetically, it might be happening. Okay.
The other thing that I picked up, I don't know whether that's it's not per se a trend, but we used to be very much about, oh, we're going to the cloud. Then the next wave came like, oh, we need to have an API, and then like every vendor now wants to have an app ecosystem. And now the last couple of months, everybody needs to have like a flavor of AI in their products because and that's also interesting to see that movement. But you can't have, so there's a natural order to this. If you're not going that well cloud native, it's hard to build APIs, it's harder to build apps, and you don't get the data. So we can't skip all the steps all of a sudden because we got the latest. But we would assume everybody got their stuff in order to already get to the AI already. So
in the past, I was much more negative towards that. Everything gets a CI/CD sticker, or everything gets a Agile sticker, machine learning, DevOps, platform engineering. Those stickers I was negative. But I changed my view on that because I feel like that all those stickers, right, do improve things. Not to the level that they are advertised. So all those companies are not doing AI, they're just inventing things and stuff like that. But that hype ultimately very often brings good things. Like DevOps, if you look at it from the vendor perspective, was definitely hype, right? But it improved also overall how we do things.
I think you're right. It's all about creating extra pressure points in a way that they're nudges in, hey, did you think about that? Did you level up that strategy? Did you think about this? And it helps us kind of raise the bar on many things. So I tend to agree that it's not a bad thing, but obviously the pressure between just having something set on the marketing slide and then making it a reality, I'm too much of an engineer to know there's a difference between both of that all of a sudden.
Yeah, and then there is that pressure from the user perspective of, if every company is doing AI, how do I actually choose the one who is actually doing it, right? How do I choose the right one? But again, it's a process that ends up in a good place,
Correct.
I guess.
Yeah. And now I'm also more involved about autonomy of a team, but then with governance. What does it mean? How much, like where do you put the line? What are the safeguards? How much is freedom? Which is an interesting area to think about in many ways. Quite often also from a security perspective, but also from a cost perspective. So again, it's like different aspects you weave into your equation when you're looking for like what should I do next? And it seems like the logical thing to do.
Couple of times I was in a similar situation when I was doing officially or unofficially some kind of management work. And I always had that problem in my head. Hey, I want people to have more autonomy, but they cannot really have the autonomy that I had before, because that would be madness. Where's the line between full autonomy that I had and now I'm doing some kind of management work and I want, but not that much in a way, right? Because, I don't know.
Isn't that sort of like parenting? You think about what you did at 10 years old, and then you get a 10-year-old and you go, there's no way this kid is going to do that.
I mean, no. That kid is going to do that. It's just that there's no way that I'm going to accept that kid doing that. That's the difference, right?
Yeah, I might talk about maturity models from time to time, but it's basically you look at certain areas like how mature are you? So how much trust, how much kind of do I remove any of the guardrails too much? So there's a balance between that, like knowledge, expertise, in your balancing of those guardrails, I believe, there as well. But making it more objective with metrics, that's what I try to achieve now. So
that's challenging, right? Because I feel like it's, at least for me personally, it's relatively easy for me to discover what are the guardrails that I should put on myself, right? But then those guardrails cannot be applied to others. And you cannot really know for certain what are, you're not that person, you're not that team. You don't know for certain what are the appropriate guardrails that will neither slow them down nor lead to chaos, right?
Yeah. And that's actually relates to an observation I'd made myself. So if you think about when you set out in the individual contributor, you kind of go up the ladder, as they say. So you start off knowing not a lot, and then you end up knowing not a lot about all them doing because they're doing it full time. You're just trying to help them and kind of give feedback as much as you can, but you don't know their job as well as they are doing because they're doing it day to day. So in a way, you feel becoming less smart again, but then you end up being more broad as they are. So it's kind of like one of those observations, I guess.
It takes all kinds. Patrick, thanks for coming on again. Just to let you know, I'll be bringing chocolates next time, but they won't be as good since you're in Belgium, but there'll be chocolates because episode 250 falls on Valentine's Day in 2024. So we'll have chocolates
in real life. We'll get this done.
That would be amazing. You're traveling again. Victor's traveling a lot. I go to the supermarket and that's
Should we call for sponsors who want to do this? Like have a reunion?
We need a reunion
Franchise.
tour that needs to be fully sponsored by. So we would need airfare coverage, first class, for at least how many people for each family? 3, 4?
No, look.
Hotels.
If you would move Potsdam for some 4 to 5 months to be later, that would be the perfect place.
Yeah.
I don't understand why FOSDEM is in February in Belgium.
I think it's a
that just seems cold on all sorts of. Oh, because it's on campus.
Yeah.
That's right. I also don't understand why you have winter break in. Well, I do understand why you have winter break in winter, but it's why have winter break in a place that always has winter. That doesn't make any sense to me. Wouldn't that, by definition, just be break all the time?
No, but Belgium is actually beautiful in summer, and so it's not really winter all the time. Just during FOSDEM.
Just during FOSDEM. That 1 week, that's when it's winter in Belgium. Okay. Patrick, thanks for coming on again.
Pleasure.
And we'll talk to you again in another 50 weeks.
Take care.
We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.